dear Father in heaven, we thank you this day for the opportunity we have to gather for this class. Father, please bless us with thy Spirit that we might be receptive, that we might be touched by the message shared here tonight. Throughout this section of classes, please help us to see the benefits of the gospel of freedom in our lives and help us to understand it. Father, please bless the instructor that you might be able to have thy Spirit and teach by thy Spirit the things that thou would have him to convey to us. Father, we love you and thank you for this opportunity to say these things in the name of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Thank you, guys. Our pledge will now be led by Logan. I'll say some about our teacher and words.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our teacher tonight will be Brother Scott Moran. He is a really nice guy. He can be really funny at times, and he can also be really spiritual. And I'm so glad he's our teacher tonight. I'll turn the time over to him now.
Well, I appreciate that introduction. As I'm sitting back there, I realized that I didn't have any of my books up here, so I'll grab those and that'll help us to get started here. So, question for all of you. Why are you here tonight? That's a question. Why are you here tonight? Please.
To learn about the Constitution.
Okay, excellent. What else?
To know what's going to happen so I can be prepared.
Excellent. Okay. Why else, Brother Clough?
So we can learn how we can be part of the Lord's work going forward.
Excellent. Okay, good. Any other thoughts? Did that pretty much sum it up? Yes.
So my children and grandchildren enjoy the freedoms that I have.
Good. Good. Excellent. Okay, any other thoughts? That sums up why we're here today. If you are coming to get a lecture, if you're coming to just be taught, this may not be where you want to be, because this is not going to be a lecture per se. This series, we've got 5 classes that we're going to be doing on American history and prophecy. This class is a call to action. My experience with the constitutional experience, the founding fathers, all of that, goes back to about the time when I got married. I was blessed to marry into a wonderful family that was very patriotic, that understood liberty and the rights and responsibilities that we have, and I had no clue with that. And as I would listen to them talk and share and all of that, it would go in one ear and out the other. And they were very patient with me, and we got along. Our family, just a little bit of our background, is that we have 7 children, and I have a wonderful wife. I need her to stand up here. This is my wife, Danae. And if you knew on the flyer it said that Scott and Danae Horan would be teaching the class. Here's the relationship in this relationship with that, is that I stand up here in the front, and then she sits down right here, and when I start to go off on a tangent, she goes, don't do that. and then I know, so I'm the kite that takes off, and she's the line that reels me back in. So watch her. If you see it start going like this, you'll know that I'm getting off a little bit, and she's bringing me back in. But over the past 28 years we've been married, and our 7 children, we felt that we needed to homeschool our children. And back when we started in the early 80s, or mid-80s, I should say, homeschooling wasn't a really popular thing to do back then. For those of you that were homeschooling back then, you understand what we were doing. But we felt that was important for us. And so we went through that experience, and not having any experience, we came from the public school system. We just made the best. We've done everything. We were involved with Benjamin Franklin Academy. We have done, for all the different... We've done everything, just about charter school and private school and public school and everything in between. And with that experience, it helped us to understand a little bit more the rights and responsibilities that we have here. So fast forward 28 years. In July of this year, I went to do some home teaching. And I took with me the First Presidency's message with that. And in that First Presidency's message, President Monson is talking about the world needs pioneers today. And in that message, if you remember it, he talks about the pioneers. And President Monson has talked about the pioneers on numerous occasions and the sacrifices that they've made for the liberties that we have here today. And so he talked about those sacrifices. And then as I was reading, he made a comment here that really jumped out at me. And that it was at that point that I had a little spiritual 2x4 that kind of smacked me upside the head. And this is what he said. He says, we forget how the Greeks and the Romans prevailed magnificently in a barbaric world and how that triumph ended. How a slackness and softness finally overcame them to their ruin. In the end, more than they wanted freedom, they wanted security and comfort. Security and a comfortable life. And they lost all. Comfort, security, and freedom. When I read that, I realized that he was talking to me. Up until that point in time, I had been concerned about my family, which is what I should be. I was concerned about my retirement, which I thought I should be. The comforts and securities that I needed to have, building a successful business, being able to provide for my family. Those were things that were my focus. And when it came to what the government was doing, when it came to what was happening around in the community, it's like, that's fine. They'll take care of that. But I realized that what I was doing was wrong. The next month, August, being a homeschooling family, Dr. Kimber, when we heard that Dr. Kimber was coming to Idaho Falls to do a lecture, my wife grabbed me and she said, hey, Dr. Kimber's coming, let's go see him. I said, okay, that's great. I always tried to support my wife in her homeschool experience. It's like, okay, honey, good deal, go get him. So I took her down there, and we sat and we listened to Dr. Kimber talk. As he talked about that program, as he talked about Kimber Academy and the educational experience that he offered, he also talked about what is going on in our country. He talked about where our government is and some of the challenges and trials that are there. He talked about the Constitution. And he told an experience of when he was down in Arizona. He got a phone call from the governor of Arizona. And the governor said, hey, I'm going to pick up Ezra Taft Benson from the airport. Would you like to come along? And he says, absolutely. So Dr. Kimber goes down to the airport, they pick up President Benson, and they're driving to their destination. And while they're driving, they're having this discussion with President Benson. And they talked about the Constitution. They talked about our country and what it was. And they asked, what do we need to do to wake up the people in the church? What do we need to do about that? And he said, and they asked, so what do we need to do about the husbands and the wives? And he said that when the fiery darts of the adversary begin to hear, let me back up, actually what it was, how are we going to motivate the brethren to do this, the priesthood? And he says it will be the wives that will motivate them. And he said, what do we need to do to motivate the sisters? And it was at that point that he said, when the umbrella of the Constitution is taken away and the fiery darts of the adversary start to hit their children, the women will wake up their husbands. And as I began to read President Benson, he talks and he asks the question, not if, but when we'll engage. And the question he always asked was, how much blood will have to be spilled to bring back what we've lost? And that's a reality that we face today. So why are we here tonight? This class is to be a call to action. Why are you here? You want the same liberties and rights for your children that you're enjoying today. Hopefully more rights and liberties than we have today. My opinion is this, and I guess I'm free to express my opinion because I'm up here talking, but my opinion is this, is that I don't believe that the government is going to be reclaimed. That I don't think we're going to change the direction that we're heading. We've been told by prophecy that the Constitution is going to hang by a thread. And the elders of Israel will come back and basically bring back what was lost. The question is, how far will that go before we bring it back? So, the question again, why are you here tonight? Now, if I can share another experience with you. In July of the same year, when I was doing my home teaching message, there was a group of 10 ladies, homeschool mothers, that went down to Lehi, Utah. They went down to hear Dr. Kimber and to hear his presentation about Kimber Academy. While they were down there, they had the experience that they needed to open up an academy here. And as they, I don't know, did they vote on it? The bottom line, as they counseled together, they all voted that Sister Gibson should start the school. Well, unbeknownst to Sister Gibson, I ought to have you come up and tell you. You probably tell it better than I could. Anyway, but she says, oh, you're kidding. I don't want to do this. But the Spirit bore witness to her that that's what she needed to do. Then she called up her husband, Andy, and he says, are you kidding? And then he went home that night and he prayed about it. And the Spirit told him that that's what he should do. And so, being obedient to the promptings that they felt, they came back to Idaho Falls and began the process. And the Gibsons, along with many other families here in this area, started working together to put together Kimber Academy. So that was at that point where I got involved as I listened to Dr. Kimber and my wife were coming home, and we felt that experience. We felt the Lord telling us that we needed to be involved with this. And so here we are, and I'm teaching senior class, and my wife Danae is helping with the event, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. But as we've talked about that, as we started to make the preparations for the school, as we began to put things in order, and as pieces started to come together to start the school, and the goal was, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, we were starting the school on September 3rd. And we did, and we started it, and as you know, those of you who are involved with the school, you know that a location has been an issue, and so we met, where did we meet the first time? That's right, we did. We went down there, and we kind of did some, squatters back in the olden days. They'd find a piece of ground, they'd go in and build a little shack. Well, we kind of did that with the building. We went in, we squatted in the commercial building for, a week or two, maybe. Anyway. And then we realized that wasn't going to work, and so we went to another building, and then we, Brother and Sister Clough offered their home. If you didn't hear the story, they have teepees from a family reunion we did years before. And we had this great idea. We were going to have teepees, and we were going to have our classes in the teepees. And the weather the kids were all excited about it, but the weather wasn't cooperating with us. So we ended up in their home, and we're in there now, and we're grateful for that. But as we started this school, Sister Gibson, with a group of youth, went down to Arizona for an event that was down there. And as we got looking at Kimber Academy, we heard about a program that was involved with Kimber Academy called Restoration Generation. And you'll be hearing a lot more about that. Restoration Generation was this little catchword that we'd been hearing about. And so Melissa took this 14-hour drive down to Arizona and 14 hours back. And during that time, she and Dr. Kimber, with the youth that were there, learned more about Restoration Generation. How about 4 years ago, Dr. Kimber takes a group down to over to the Middle East, at least once a year, if not twice a year. And while they're down in an archaeological dig, where they be at Lehi, and they learn about that. They learn about Jerusalem, the culture, and all of that that's going on down there. About 4 years ago, Dr. Kimber was down there, and he received a phone call. And the person on the other end said, the royal family in Jordan would like to come and visit with you, or would like you to come and visit with them. And he says, well, that's great. Should I bring my photographer with me? And they said, yeah, that would be great. And so he realized at that time that this was a legitimate phone call. And so next thing he knew, he was on a plane over to Jordan. He gets off. They meet him at the airport. They take him over to the palace. He's escorted into the palace. They open the doors, and there's the royal family on each side of the room going down. He's ushered in, taken right up to the crown prince. The prince says, Dr. Kimber, what an honor it is to meet you. And he says that during the discussion, he says that we've watched the youth that you've brought over here to Jerusalem. We know the caliber of youth that they are. We've gone to your government, and we've asked them if they would send representatives to come teach us about the Constitution. And the government has told us that, no, you don't want to learn about a Constitution. It's outdated. It's not any good. And it was just for a bunch of farmers, 200 years ago. And so because of that, we still know the value that's there. We know the blessings that have come to your country as a result of it. Will you send some of your youth to teach us of the Constitution? We don't want your adults. We want your youth to come, because the adults always have an agenda. But if you could prepare your youth and send them, then you can teach our youth. And we can enjoy those same principles. And Dr. Kimber says, you bet, I can do that. So he comes back to Utah, and over a 3-year process begins to prepare a group of youth for that. During that time period, they went over, checked with other countries, and they saw that there was a real need and interest to have these youth go over there. And soon after that, Dr. Kimber had a bout with cancer. And unfortunately, that Restoration Generation had to be mothballed. So fast forward now to August. Restoration Generation was unveiled again. And as I've thought about that, I often thought about Aladdin. As he's going through and he finds that lamp, and as he starts to dust off that lamp and clean it up, the genie appears. And that's what Restoration Generation has been for us. As we found this little jewel called Restoration Generation, and we began to dust it off, a vision has presented itself to us. A vision and a need. And as we have talked with Dr. Kimber more about this, we visited with him about 3 weeks ago. And in that conversation, he said that there are 27 countries that have specifically asked for us to send our youth there to teach them about the Constitution and about the principles that are there. That is Restoration Generation. And that is why we're here tonight. As we have counseled together, as we have sought the direction of our Heavenly Father, as we have talked with Dr. Kimber, we have learned more about this program. A program that will preach the gospel of freedom in preparation for the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the process. And that's why I hope that you're here tonight. Being involved with my father-in-law, DeMar Clough, those of you who recognize the title of Liberty, and I think you've seen this flag often in the field of flags that they've had. This has been a part of our family for quite a few years now. As I would sit and in the lectures that they would put together on the Constitution and learn about those principles, there was always one thing that was missing. What then? What do I do now? Now, granted, my wife says that I'm a convert to the gospel of freedom of about, 3 months now. And I ask the question, what now? That's what restoration is all about. I would like to extend each one of you an invitation. I hope you feel the Spirit that's here. I appreciate Brevin and those who helped with our opening. I appreciate Brother Parks in his prayer as he invited the Spirit to be here. Because I would like to extend to you an invitation. We have in Kimber Academy, we have what we call a recall experience. During religion and history, we take 15 minutes where the youth, we try and make this quiet environment where the youth come in and they take 15 minutes and they ask the Lord, they ask the Spirit, to share with them principles that they've learned. And so they're having that, the Spirit will help them to recall what they're having, what they've learned. And this is for a couple of reasons. One, to help them later on in their lives, and also to help them with the history that they have. But in that, they learn to listen to the Spirit. I would like to invite each one of you to invite the Spirit into your hearts. Because each one of you will receive a prompting tonight of what the Lord would have you do. Not all of us here are going to go over to the Middle East and preach the principles of the Constitution. Some of you will be here. Some of you will use it in your families. Some of you will use it. You'll feel the need to help with our country and that. And others of you will go over to the Middle East and share this. But I'd like to extend to you that invitation to look in your heart and see what the Lord would have you do. This class is going to be 5 weeks of America in history and prophecy and you. We'll talk about America. We'll talk about how America became what it is today. We're going to talk about the American covenant that Timothy Ballard talks about and what that means for us as children of Abraham. We'll discuss those things. But each one of you are going to be impacted individually in what you feel like you should do. If you're a mother in Zion, and the Lord wants you to teach these principles to your mother, you can teach them to your mother too, but teach them to your children, then you can use it for that. But what does the Lord want you to do with this? So this isn't another lecture, but this is going to be personal to you. We'll have time for reflection. We'll talk about the characters in our nation's history that made this country what it is today. But we're not just going to talk about the events, we're going to talk about the individuals themselves, their personality traits. As much as I would love to be a Captain Moroni. Anybody else here like to be a Captain Moroni? I would love to be a Captain. I'm not a Captain Moroni, but are there some things from Captain Moroni that I could learn and apply to myself that are applicable? Absolutely. How about a Ruth? How about an Esther? How about Joan of Arc? You bet. You may not, Cassidy, you may not be a Joan of Arc and be asked to lead armies out to conquer the English for a country, but there's qualities that Joan of Arc had, virtuous qualities and characteristics that made her who she is and who she was then. These are the things. This is a class of developing character. Are we going to learn about the Constitution? Absolutely. Restoration Generation is a series of classes. This is the introduction. This is a clarion call to action. After this, we're going to go through the 5,000-year lead, where we discuss the 28 principles that made this country what it is today. We're going to talk about the healing of America, and we're going to talk about those principles, because once the Constitution hangs by a thread, what do we do to bring it back? What's the process of making that happen? We're going to teach you that. We're going to teach you the naked communist and what Satan's plan is, so that you can understand not only what it's supposed to look like, but understand what parts are missing from the program, so it'll become obvious. That's what it is. So you'll have that whole education, like we talked about today in school, where you have that complete picture. But in addition to that, you will come away with what it is that you need to do. What you're going to do to make a difference. That's Restoration Generation. That's why we're here. So I'm hoping that every one of you that have come get that answer. And if you will ask, I promise you that you will. Okay? Any questions so far? Any thoughts, concerns? Is it hot in here or is it just me? I don't think we can crack a window. So can we crack a window? James has got a window back there. All right. Good. Okay, first thing I need everybody to do is I need everybody to stand up. Okay. Stretch, turn around, do the hokey pokey, turn the person next to you and say, I am so happy to be here. Okay, good. Okay, stretch. Yeah, give hugs if you want to give hugs. That's appropriate. If it's okay with the person next to you. Excellent. Okay. If you need to take a potty break, now's a great time to do it. We're going to take. We'll stop here at 8 o'clock and do that, but we're going to periodically stretch and keep the blood flowing. So, if you're good, let's go ahead and get started. If you have your books, I really think we need to put for our class, we need to have American history. Is that what it says? Yeah, American history of prophecy and you down here. And you can write, if you want to, you can put your name down here. You can put Ann Christie, or you can put Ann Logan, or, whoever. Matt, put Matt down there. Matt and Matt, okay? Do that. Because this is you. And we're going to talk about, we're going to go through some of the hook dates that we call them in Kimber Academy. And then we're going to also talk about the individuals and the characters. Okay, so, history. Way back in the day, we know the Savior created a world. And on that, we understand the plan of salvation and all that entails. Back then, what was the land mass? How much land mass did we have? Any thoughts?
When again?
I'm sorry?
When again?
At the very beginning, how many continents were there? James? There was one. Okay, there was one that went on. And how did that work? Did it work out okay that way? So what was kind of the history there? First we start out, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And from that we learn that the Garden of Eden, right there, that first, I'm on page 4. It says the Garden of Eden. Even from the beginning of creation, America has been God's special place. In the following quote, Elder Jeffrey R. Holland reemphasizes that the Lord revealed that the Garden of Eden is near Independence, Missouri, in America. The choicest part of this earthly creation was a garden eastward in Eden, where God placed our first parents, Adam and Eve. This resplendent place, filled with paradisical glory, was located on that part of the landmass where the city of Zion, or the New Jerusalem of the earth's last days, would eventually be built. It was interesting for me to note that the beginning of civilization, and it's not going to be the end of civilization, but the beginning of civilization started around in Missouri, and the New Jerusalem, where the Savior will come and will rule and reign, will be back in that same area. Choice location in America. As we go through, we know how the life goes. Adam had his posterity. They grew, they expanded, they encompassed the whole earth. We know that from that because of wickedness, because the children of Israel, not the children of Israel, but the children of Adam, followed the adversary. They followed Satan and chose him over God. There was one exception to that, where we had the city of Enoch. Enoch was called as a young man, as a youth. He had a missionary service of 365 years. How'd you like that for a mission call? I think only surpassed by Noah. You remember how long Noah's missionary call was? I want to say 500 years. Is that right? I have to check and see. Don't quote me on that, but that's what I was thinking. But anyway, that was a long mission. I know, Brother Clark, did you serve a 3-year mission? 2 years. Okay. Twice. Okay. I served an 18-month mission. I thought 18 months was a long time. But 365 years he served. The end result of that was the city of Enoch, or the cities of Enoch, righteousness being such that they were taken up into heaven. But that was the cream of the crop that was there. We know the story of Noah. 2344 was when the flood took place. because the world needed to be cleansed, because the wickedness ruled over the earth. And the Lord knew that for His purposes to come forth on the earth, that there would need to be a cleansing that would take place. And so the earth was cleansed. 8 people that were on the ark survived. They came back, the ark landed on Mount Ararat, they went out, and they started a new civilization. Now the interesting thing about that is that Noah and his descendants were commanded to go out and to have what they call a pastoral civilization. What that means is they were to go out and they were to be farmers, herdsmen, to live out and about. You always hear about the tent of Noah, the tent of Ham. That was because that's how they lived back then. But not everybody wanted to do that. There were stories back in the day of what life was like before. And there was a man whose name was not Nehor. What was his name? Nimrod. Thank you. See, this is my daughter. She's my other help. So my wife says yes and don't, and my daughter, she keeps me straight on all my facts. She does that in our school too. Thanks, Larissa. Nimrod. Nimrod was a direct descendant of Cain through Ham. Nimrod had a burr under his saddle. He was one that did not want to follow the commandments of God, but he wanted to do his own thing. And so with that, he was gathering the people together. And he started, hey, listen, back before the flood, we had these great big cities, and we had a great time together. And we would get together, and they could live and do, and you could accomplish so many other things. And when people started to follow Nimrod, he was a hunter of men. He was a great hunter. In the Scriptures, it tells us that he was a great hunter unto the Lord. But we know in the New Translation, with the Joseph Smith translation, that it wasn't unto the Lord, but he was a great hunter, and he was unto himself. And Nimrod started to gather the people there, and they created a city, and the city was called Babel. And he says, you know what? The Lord flooded this earth, and we're not going to, if he decides to do it again, we're going to be prepared for that. And they started to build a tower. And they built this tower, they started to make bricks, and they started to mortar it. It was all waterproof. And it was so strong that they were amazed by it. And the groups were so well organized, and they worked so quickly, that the tower grew exponentially. And it went up there. One of the other things that was interesting to me was that we learned from Dr. Skousen that at that time, the city of Enoch was still visible. Did you know that? That they could see the city of Enoch from where they were. And so when they were building the tower to get to heaven, they were trying to reach the city of Enoch. So there was twofold purposes to that. Well, was it a righteous desire? No, obviously it wasn't. And so because of that, we know the story, the Lord confounded the languages. Now, during that period of time, we learned of another family that was there. A man by the name of Mahanaim Moriankamer. He had a brother named Jared. And these two lived in a valley just outside of Babel. And there they had the desire that they were going to... Well, I need to stop for a second. After the flood, 100 years later, the Lord knew, the Lord desired to have a land separate from where the rest of civilization was. And so 100 years later, 2234 BC, the ground separated, the continent shifted, and America was formed, separated by the oceans. Peleg is another meaning for Peleg is division. And so that's where that came from. And so, 40 years after the separation, the Lord confounded the languages of the people that were there. And the brother of Jared petitioned the Lord and asked that two requests. One, that their language would not be confounded, and two, that they would be led to a promised land. And the Lord honored that request, and they continued to speak the Adamic language, and the Lord led them. And the Lord came to them and appeared to them in a cloud. And he led them through the wilderness, and he led them across. And at that point in time, there was still water that was on the continents. And there was a great sea that was there in the wilderness. And they built barges and they went across that sea. But the Lord wouldn't let them stay there. And so he took them and they crossed the great waters. And that's when they built their barges, and they had the hole in the top and the hole in the bottom. And the Lord drove them across to the promised land. And in that promised land, he told them this. He said, the Lord would not suffer that they should stop beyond the sea in the wilderness, but he would that they should come forth even to the land of promise, which was choice above all other lands, which the Lord God had preserved for a righteous people. And he had sworn in his wrath unto the brother of Jared, that whoso should possess this land of promise, from that time henceforth and forever, should serve him, the true and only God, or that they should be swept off when the fullness of his wrath should come upon them. And then he goes on to say, here's how important this covenant is with the inhabitants of this country. In verse 9, and now we behold that the decrees of God concerning this land, that it is a land of promise, and whatsoever nation shall possess it shall serve God, or they shall be swept off when the fullness of his wrath shall come upon them. And the fullness of his wrath cometh upon them when they are ripened in iniquity. Okay, there's twice. Verse 10, for behold, this is a land which is choice above all other lands, wherefore he that doth possess it shall serve God, or shall be swept off. For it is the everlasting decree of God, and it is not until the fullness of iniquity among the children of the land that they are swept off. In 3 verses, the Lord emphasizes 3 times that responsibility that the inhabitants of this land have. Does he make good on his promise? You better believe it. 2.5 times the Lord has made good on that promise. The first time was, which group? You remember? Jaredites, okay. Second time, what was the second group? Nephites. And the half time was who? Here in America, the Lord set up a constitution. He set up a form of government that the gospel of Jesus Christ could flourish and grow and prosper. There was one part that was left undone, and that was the issue of slavery. And because the issue of slavery was still going and going strong, the people were warned, you need to stop this. Joseph Smith was running for president with on the ticket that slavery would be abolished. That was an abhorrence to God. But did we follow it? No, we didn't. And so the Lord took the saints and he put them out of the country, stuck them over in Mexico, and then we had a civil war. 600,000 Americans were killed. During that war, I love Timothy Ballard. If any of you have heard Timothy Ballard talk, he talks about the American covenant. He goes through all this in detail. Great insight. One of the things that he points out is that Abraham Lincoln, when he started his presidency, he said, listen, he's talking to the South. He says, come back, just come back and be with us. It's okay. You can bring the slaves, it's all right. You know, we're going to do, Betty Hug and great things are going to be wonderful. And they started into the Civil War. The North was losing. Abraham Lincoln went to the Lord and says, why? Timothy Ballard found out that Abraham Lincoln went down to the Library of Congress and got a copy of the Book of Mormon. He had it for 8 months. Studied it. He's got the records, got his signature on it. The whole 9 yards. He checked it back in. And he came back with the Emancipation Proclamation. Abraham Lincoln understood the covenant. He understood what we were just reading here. The promise that we have, the obligation that we have. He presents it to a cabinet. Every one of them rejected it except one. But he says, it doesn't matter. We're going to go ahead and do this. And he went out and said, slavery needs to stop. As soon as he did that, the North began to win the war. Time passed. The war was made. It was concluded. Abraham Lincoln finished his mission here on the earth, and he went on the other side of the veil. That is the covenant obligation that we have. That covenant promise that we have with God. It's interesting that Mosiah, he set up a similar thing, a similar form of government. with his people. You know, up until that time they had been ruled by kings. If you go to the 29th chapter of Mosiah, it's wonderful. This is where Mosiah starts to teach the people about that. You know the story that his sons, they went off to the Lamanites, they were teaching the gospel to the Lamanites, and he said, okay, we need to choose a king. I'm getting a little bit old. They choose Aaron, his son. Aaron says, no, I don't want to do that, Dad. And so everybody else is saying, well, you need to talk to Aaron. Make him be king. And he's going, that's not fair to Aaron, and it's not fair to you. He said, I've been thinking about something here. What if we were to change the government? And the people went, you know, we like having a king. It's a good thing. And he says, you know, there's some problems with having a king. You remember wicked King Noah? You remember what he had? It's great if you've got a righteous king over here, but in one generation, if you've got a wicked king that comes in, what happens to the people? He takes them down with them. He's got all power, all authority, all responsibility. But he says, what if we set up a form of government where you have judges that will come in, and we'll have our laws that are established, and there'll be laws according to what God has set up. We'll have judges that judge the people, and you know what? You can choose the judges. You can find the people that you most trust, and you think they're going to do a good job, and we'll elect them, put them in there, and they'll judge you. And then you'll have your agency to do what you want. You won't have a king telling you what to do. They loved the idea. It said that it says that they really liked it. It did. Detroit. Let's see. Right here. Therefore they relinquished their desires for a king and became exceedingly anxious that every man should have an equal chance throughout all the land. Yea, and every man expressed a willingness to answer for his own sins. Wow, they liked that. They liked having their liberties, and they wanted their children to have the same. That was a good thing. And so they went along with it. What a blessing it was to them. That's the country in which we live. So I'm going to ask the question, so what does that have to do with you here? What does that have to do with you? Why are you here? Okay, let's keep going on. For this to be able to work, we have to have a righteous people. Now, here's another part of the you. The question that I'll ask is, where are you? Where is your heart? Because the only way that this will work is if our hearts are pure and if our desires are righteous. This can't be for personal gain. The Lord knows the thoughts and the intents of our heart. Like it or not, He can't pull the wool over His eyes. And so with that, the question for you is, where is your heart? And that'll be a question that we'll talk about over and over again. So, Isaiah, Tower of Babel, the Jaredites, we're going to Isaiah. Isaiah gets some wonderful prophecies. One of the prophecies that we read about a lot, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the future. How many of you are familiar with the dedicatory prayer of the Idaho Falls Temple? If you haven't read it, you need to read it. Because there's something that is phenomenally interesting about that. Did you know that it talks about the Constitution in the dedicatory prayer of the Idaho Falls Temple? Brother Clark, what is it, about a fourth of the prayer? Takes up that much of it?
It's about 2 pages.
2 pages of that prayer. Talks about the Constitution. Talks about the wise men that were called to set up this form of government. Talks about how Zion, that the Word will go forth from the New Jerusalem. And we've learned that New Jerusalem is here. What does that mean to you today? What does that mean to us? And the law. The law, what did I say? The Constitution? The Word. Oh, yeah. Thank you. The law will go forth. We got the law and the Word that will go forth. The Word is the gospel. but also the law. The law will go forth. The law is what? The Constitution. Why does the Constitution have to go first? You do. You have to have a free country. You have to be a free people. You've got to have that soil, that environment, if you will. That's why the Lord created America. That's why the Lord has the promises and the covenants of America, is that you have to have that. And if we're not faithful and true to those covenants, then what will happen? He'll start over again. He will. But we know that this time, He's not going to have to start over. And so for us, Restoration Generation is a process of teaching the gospel of freedom in preparation for the gospel of peace that will come, which is the gospel of peace or the gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay, so why don't we do this? Let's stop here. We're going to have a break, and let's take the next 10 minutes. We can go out. You can get a drink here, another drink down here. There's bathrooms. James, where are the bathrooms?
Bathrooms are downstairs. If you go to the bottom of the stairs, you take a left, or you take a right and another right on the other side of the office reception area. The other one on the side.
Okay, all right. Why don't we take the next 10 minutes? We can stretch and